Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name's Cami Sacco, and I am a climate programs manager with Second Nature. And you are here for the last webinar in our climate action planning series, which is what we're going to be talking about today is updating your climate action plan. So I will be introducing our panelists in just a couple minutes. Before that, I'm going to go just through a couple logistics, and then we have a poll to learn a little bit more about who you are and where you come from. So program is being recorded. We'll upload this to YouTube, and it'll be sent out to all of the registrants, and you're welcome to access it at any time. If you're feeling friendly today, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Just make sure when you're introducing yourself in the chat to change that the to line is to everyone versus just the hosts and the panelists. Sometimes folks just say hi to the panelists and don't realize it. So yeah, feel free to introduce yourself. And if you have any additional questions, you're welcome to use either the Q&A or chat. We also have questions from the registration that we'll be using to kind of jumpstart the conversation after the presentations. And we should have about 15 minutes for those. So kind of as I mentioned, this is the last webinar for our climate action planning webinar series. This has been happening since August of 2024, and we have a breadth of those available on our YouTube channel. And so we discussed anything from how to choose your path on whether to use a consultant or in-house or completely standalone within your institution. Or we have other ones such as embedding equity or decarbonization tactics around geothermal or geo-exchange systems, as well as different levels of engagement, whether it be faculty or staff, alumni, students, and a couple other ones that, again, you can find on our website. So that information is, or that website is right here, or you can also just Google search our YouTube channel and can find it there. I'm sure some of you will be joining us in DC next week. We will be hosting our Higher Education Climate Leadership Summit in DC. And so we will be there Sunday to Tuesday. And if you still haven't registered, registration is open for just a couple more days. So you're welcome to go to the website higheredclimatesummit.org to figure out what those registration prices are, or if you have any questions, you're welcome to chat me during the webinar. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll, and this just, again, really helps us understand who you are and kind of where you're coming from. If I can find it. There we go. And I'll have this be launched for just a couple minutes, and then we'll jumpstart with the content. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end this and then I'll just talk through the results. So it looks like we have quite a few sustainability staff from the facilities or operations part of the institution, and also quite a few sustainability folks from upper administration, and then a couple from academic affairs, and then a couple others in there, and one non-university attendee. Welcome. Type of institution folks are coming from about 40%, split down, almost split down the middle, 38 and 38 of large public institutions and private institutions. And then we have a couple from small publics, and then a couple from minority serving institutions and community colleges. Really glad y'all are here, the MSIs and community colleges. We would definitely want to see more of you. And the questions that we really had around the topic is, are you actively planning on updating your climate action plan? And almost 90% of you said yes, which is great. And then if so, how frequently do you plan on updating your climate action plan? Which interesting to know that a lot of you, 56%, don't know or you haven't discussed it. So for a panelist, that'd be good to speak to a little bit. So that's really helpful for us to just understand again who you are and who's in the room. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and I'll just ask them to come on screen for a second. So we have Sara Holzknecht, Elissa Gordon, and Liz Borsage. Sara and Elissa are from Bellevue College, and Liz is the Zero Waste Program Director at University of Illinois, Chicago. So we're first going to have Sara and Elissa from Bellevue College, which is located in Washington State. And so I'm going to read Sara and Elissa's bios, and then I'll hand it over to them. So Sara comes from the college with a deep background in business and nonprofit management. Following a decade operating a local boutique winery, Sara shifted her focus from winemaking to addressing climate and environmental issues. Most recently, she ran the Washington State campaigns for Oceana, an international ocean conservation NGO, where she worked to address plastic pollution, offshore drilling, and building sustainable fisheries at the state, federal, and local levels. Prior to her work with Oceana, she co-founded local climate advocacy nonprofit 350 East Side, where she organized local decarb efforts and community education. She holds a master's in energy and climate policy from Johns Hopkins University and a bachelor's in business admin from the University of Washington, Bothell. In her free time, Sara can usually be found in the mountains and backcountry rock climbing, ski touring, mountain biking, and hiking with family and friends. And she still enjoys a glass of wine from time to time. And Elissa Gordon is the Associate Director for the Office of Sustainability and has been with the college for 6 years. Her background is in natural resource conservation with a focus on wildlife research. She holds a degree in environmental science. She previously worked at the federal, state, and local nonprofit levels on various conservation projects. Researching and observing human-caused impacts to the environment fostered a deep passion for sustainability, and she helps BC strive toward its carbon neutrality, environmental, and climate justice goals. Elissa has worked at all 3 national parks in Washington State, and in her free time, you can find her exploring the outdoors with her dog and her husband. So, Sara, I think I'm going to hand it over to you. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us today. And yeah, welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining as we talk a little bit about the process of updating our climate action plan. And Cami, if you can advance to the next slide, just a bit about our office. So we are a small but mighty team. Elissa and I are the 2 full-time staff members on our team. We also have a part-time digital media coordinator and a Climate Corps fellow at the moment, although that's a 10-month fellowship that'll be wrapping up soon here. And then we have 2 wonderful part-time student employees, our transportation and outreach coordinators. Next slide, please. So a bit about Bellevue College, just to give you a sense of our campus. If you haven't visited Bellevue, so we are the largest community and technical college in Washington State. We are on about 100 acres of campus. It's a lovely campus to visit. We got certified as an arboretum last year, and so we have many of our native and non-native plant species identified for folks that are visiting. We do have 90 kW on-site solar currently and are planning to double that number approximately in the next few years. And we have about 1 million square feet of buildings on our campus. So as facility folks are well aware, that's a lot of preventative maintenance and planning as things are sunsetting and we're needing to do replacement of some of our equipment. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so to give a brief history, sustainability has been a big part of Bellevue College's history. The first Earth Week was in 2000, and that was really a grassroots effort led by faculty. That annual event was the catalyst for sustainability on campus. And then in 2007, we signed the American College and University's President's Climate Commitment and pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. In that same year, the Environmental Advisory Committee was formed and made up of staff and faculty. 3 years later, that committee would create our first climate action plan. After that, in 2012, our office, the Office of Sustainability, was created. And then in 2013, our office, the Office of Sustainability, and the Environmental Advisory Committee updated the climate action plan together. So then over the next 10 years, a lot happened. We built 4 LEED certified buildings. We signed on to a power purchasing agreement. We launched a sustainability concentration. And then lastly, our office updated the climate action plan in 2023, and that is what we are presenting on today. Next slide, please.
Great. So just a bit more background on our greenhouse gas emissions inventory here. This is something, and a lot of this you can find in our climate action plan. We'll share a link at the end. But as you can see, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, transportation is the lion's share of our emissions and went dramatically down during the pandemic as operations went online. And we're seeing that uptick again in subsequent years. And so, that's an area that we have identified that we are needing to focus on and an area of future work for us. So this is from our climate action plan, included this graphic that you're seeing here, as well as the pathway to zero that would be required in order to meet that carbon neutrality goal. And this has been a great resource for us as we're talking with stakeholders and with leadership about, what is needed to reduce those emissions over time. Next slide, please. So what did our CAP look like before we started? Well, here is a snapshot of the first page. So we went from a spreadsheet more or less with a lot of good information, a lot of thought and planning went into this. And, it was, I think, quite comprehensive at the time. And so as we were looking at this and we're saying, what would we want as something that we can both share with students and our, staff, faculty, and community, really is a document that is engaging, that's accessible, and that people hopefully will want to read. And so one of the things, and we'll talk more about our planning process, is we wanted something that was nicely graphically designed, visually engaging. And so we knew that was going to be a big part of the process and a bit of a lift for us, frankly. As I mentioned, we have a part-time graphic designer. And so this was a big project. One thing that we updated is we added a few sections to our CAP with this update. We added the natural resources section, the social equity section, and the resilience section. So those had not been in the previous cap. And as we were looking at the scope of what our office works on currently, and also, just what is needed ultimately in a comprehensive climate action plan, especially social equity. We acknowledge in our plan that it does need to be built into all aspects of the plan, but we wanted to have a standalone section where we were discussing work in that area. And then resilience, we really wanted to kind of uplift the need for climate adaptation. We have atmospheric rivers that come in off the Pacific here. Precipitation patterns are changing, and stormwater management and the need to address it, is becoming more and more important. And so we wanted to highlight that aspect in resilience. And then the natural resources one that we added, like I mentioned, we became a certified arboretum in 2023. And so wanted to give a place to really talk about that and some of the habitat restoration work that we'll get into a bit later. Next slide, please.
Great. So this slide is to really show the full scope of planning and to give everyone a good grasp on how long it took us from kind of start to finish. And so as I was going through the timeline in the earlier slide, you notice there was a lot of years that went by between our CAP updates. And so we have that kind of represented here between when I was at least at the college. I can't speak to before 2019, but 2019 and 2022, to be fully transparent, there were a lot of failed starts. And we want to be realistic with you that, there were times where, we started a CAP update, but for multiple reasons, it didn't end up being updated because there was a pandemic. There were really important people that left the college. There were larger projects that took priority, and you know what? It happens, and that's okay. All the work that took place during those periods of time were useful to us later on. All the notes that were taken were useful to us at a later point in time. And so we wanted to be fully transparent and share with everyone that, yeah, there were failed starts over the years. But that information and all that work did help us later when we did have capacity to start the process again. And so spring quarter 2023, we started, once we did have, the timing was right, we had full staffing again, we started to brainstorm through ideas, what we wanted this iteration of the CAP to look like and how we wanted to go about it. One thing that was really helpful was to set regular meetings, to just put those on the calendar. And so that time was set aside. Even if you didn't necessarily have things to talk through, you had that time planned. And I think, in the beginning, it was maybe every 3 weeks. And then as we got closer to unveiling the CAP, it was weekly meetings. And so you can adjust that schedule as you need to when you get closer. Another thing, as Sarah was mentioning, during that time, just to back up, we also highly recommend finding examples of climate action plans that you really like as a template. So we found different examples of climate action plans that we called our North Star that we used to kind of guide the way for us. And so we found that to be really helpful as we were kind of determining what things we liked or what things we didn't like. And another thing that came up was determining if we wanted to do the climate action plan in-house or hire a consultant to help us do it. And for us, funding was a big consideration. We didn't necessarily have a clear funding source to hire a consultant. And so, that leaned us towards doing it in-house. We also liked having the creative freedom. As I mentioned, we kind of had our North Star, and so we had a clear vision of how we wanted our CAP to look at the time. So didn't really feel like we needed a consultant's help necessarily to kind of guide us in that way. So we kind of had a clear path, but something early on for folks to consider is whether to do it in-house versus hiring a consultant, and maybe where that funding is coming from. So then in the next quarter, summer quarter 2023, that was kind of our get organized quarter. Sorry, I jumped ahead, but that's when we set up regular meetings. As I mentioned, just put it on your schedule, put it in your calendar so that that's time is just set aside. Sara mentioned making sure that you're starting to think through what sections of your CAP, make sure that it's really capturing all the work that's happening at your institution. And as I mentioned before, during all the previous CAP iterations and maybe some failed starts, that's when we were kind of consolidating all of our previous documents and notes and trying to get things into one or two tidy documents. So everything was in one or two documents. So it was all easily accessible and in one place. That was really helpful. We also started brainstorming graphics, color schemes, fonts. We were starting to think about how we wanted to get some feedback. And so having graphics was going to be important for the next quarter. When we started to do some more outreach, we really wanted to have a cohesive look to our surveys, to our outreach. And so that was really important to start to get some of that together.
Yeah, absolutely. And inspiration too, as Elissa was mentioning, looking at other CAPs that higher ed institutions had put out, also looking at other local, from our municipality, the city that we're in, the county that we're in, even at the state level, and how would ours kind of roll up into those other plans. So lots of places to get inspiration, even about some of like the planning of graphics, the one that you see on this slide, for example. We would look at other CAPs and say, this is a really clear way of communicating the process, for example, which, as you can see, as Elissa's been covering our process, it was a long process because we did decide to go the in-house route. And so fall 2023, we started doing outreach to campus, and we sent out a link for faculty where they could sign up to have us come into their classrooms, give a brief presentation on what the existing climate action plan was. And then we did a Kahoot survey where students, in class, and that was really helpful because it was built into class time. So then almost everybody in the class, if not everybody, did take the survey. And we asked what was important to them for this climate action plan, and then also just what was important to them generally in terms of climate action. And so that, and we'll share a little bit of the data in a minute, was and still continues to be really, really helpful data to us. And that helped us lay out the structure of it. So that was our first round of feedback. We then were working on drafting the plan. We sent a draft plan out to specific stakeholder groups and college leadership for feedback. And then we did a final round of campus-wide feedback. Our big goal, and this was great to have kind of a deadline, but it's a double-edged sword because it's a deadline, is that we wanted to release it during Earth Month. And so that gave us kind of a time to have it all wrapped up by. But as I'm sure everyone has experienced, Earth Month planning is a bit of work. And so this added something else to our plate. Next slide, please.
So we gathered feedback using a lot of different techniques, which we highly recommend. We went into classrooms and did quizzes, as Sarah mentioned, and that was a really great interactive way to gather feedback with students. We also sent out campus-wide surveys using emails. Also, really recommend talking to your directors or vice presidents if they have access to sending out in campus-wide emails. That's a really great route to take. We got a lot of survey responses doing that. And then we also hosted a Climate Change is Scary event on Halloween in the cafeteria. So we got a lot of foot traffic that way for folks that might not have gone to a climate-related event. Otherwise, folks going to eat lunch in the cafeteria went to our event. There were different stations set up where people could draw a carbon zero future or write out how BC should invest in climate action. So it's a really interactive way to get feedback for our climate action plan. So that was a really successful event that we can talk about later if folks have questions about that.
And so from all of these different ways of gathering feedback, we compiled data, and this is just a little bit of it that we'll share here. But air quality was rated as the most important co-benefit of climate action. You know, we found a lot of folks knew somebody impacted by climate impacts. And then, you know, as we were creating new sections of the climate action plan, one thing that we wanted to get student engagement on, campus engagement, is what did folks want to see in the social equity section? You know, obviously there is a lot that could be covered there, and we wanted to figure out what our campus wanted to prioritize. Next slide, please.
Great. So the last few slides of our presentation covers a grant project. That's a nice example of how the Climate Action Plan can showcase specific work, especially if you make space for it. So our previous CAP wasn't set up in a way to feature projects that were addressing conservation, wildlife, habitat restoration, which was an area that our work was really expanding in. And so when designing our CAP update, it was really important to make sure that we were, you know, laying out all of our projects that we were working on and tailoring those new categories to make sure that we're including the full scope of our current work, as Sarah was mentioning earlier. In March 2023, we were awarded a grant from the National Wildlife Federation and Mutual of Omaha for native plant restoration and biofiltration project on the east side of campus, which is outlined here where we have a swale and a pond. So just a note on grants, just the more people that know about your work, the better, because we received notification of this grant through the AVP of Academic Affairs. So the CAP is a really great tool for that. If people read through the CAP, know about your work, grants come across their desk and they send you those, more opportunities will come your way. So that CAP is a really great tool for that. Just getting the word out there about your work, more opportunities come your way. And so this grant supported universities and colleges in creating projects that help protect and restore wildlife and their key habitats, specifically vulnerable and endangered species. So we chose salmon because salmon populations are declining in the Pacific Northwest due to a chemical known as 6-PPD quinone, which is a tire additive that gets washed away in runoff and into streams and rivers, killing coho salmon. And so we did this great habitat restoration projects with biofiltration devices. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and so we kind of started with that group picture. That was a group of student volunteers that came and helped us do this work. But let's go back to the beginning when we had a pond that many on campus, and we are still running into colleagues that say, oh, we have a pond on campus. So anyways, we removed all of these invasives from surrounding the pond and then replanted native habitat. And I know we're out of time here, so if you want to just quickly touch on the next slide. It shows some of the work that we did, plants planted and installation of the biofiltration devices there. So planted many native plants, and now we're moving on to sampling our stormwater to show the results of this biofiltration. And then on the last slide, we have a link to our climate action plan and both of our contact information. So we could certainly go on about all of our climate plan updating, but we'll pass it back to you, Cami, and look forward to your questions.
Thanks, y'all. Sorry, I know it goes by so quickly, and I always feel bad being like, we gotta keep going, we gotta keep moving. So I really appreciate there's a lot of great information in there, and I really love the fun event that you hosted on Halloween. I think that sounded really engaging for folks that maybe haven't done something like that and during a time that is maybe not a heavy sustainability time. So it's tacking on to something that's already happening on campus. So, okay, well, I'm going to introduce Liz next. So Liz Borsage is the Zero Waste Program Director for the University of Illinois, Chicago. Liz draws on her background in public health, environmental science, and anthropology to inform her work in sustainability. Her professional interests are material waste reduction, environmental justice, compost, and policy. She serves on the boards of the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition and on the Chicago Recycling Coalition. She believes that eating leftovers, eliminating single-use plastics, and voting are the 3 easiest ways we can all make a difference. All right, Liz, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so thank you for the warm introduction. We can go to the first slide, or second slide. So UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago, we are the largest university and only public research university in Chicago. We are a Research One university, so we value our research very highly. Our campus spans 250 acres, which includes 16 colleges, 34,000 students, almost 200 buildings, and we have 16 million square feet of educational space. We are one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse universities in the country, and 68% of our students receive some form of financial assistance. You can go to the next slide. Our campus is a little bit geographically complicated. We have sort of 2 campuses. We have East Campus, which is mostly the undergraduates, and that is what was traditionally called the Circle Campus because of all the highway interchange there. And then we have our West Campus, which is predominantly the medical school and graduate level students. These 2 campuses are about a mile apart, and we'd like to see more crossover, but sometimes they function a little bit autonomously. You can go on to the next slide. All right, so we have at UIC 5 climate commitments. Our climate commitments are to be carbon neutral, zero waste, net zero water, biodiverse, and transformative scholarship. Especially, we want to achieve these goals by 2050. Transformative scholarship is an ongoing one. All right, next slide. So this is a little history of sustainability at UIC. It began before 2007, but really formally in 2007 is when we had our inaugural signatory of the American College of University Presidents Climate Commitments. In 2009, we had our first climate action plan, and this was shortly after founding our Office of Sustainability in 2008. And that set us on a more organized path that brought in more units. In 2016, we established 4 climate commitments. That was in the previous slide. It did not include transformative scholarship, although even at the time we were thinking of having that one. In 2018, we updated our climate action plan and created a climate action implementation plan to try and take what we had already done in 2009 a step further. And what could we do more? It was to create a plan to really implement the goals. In 2023, we added our 5th climate commitment, which was transformative scholarship. And we began on a 5-year update of our climate action implementation plan. So our goal is to update it every 5 years. But as was mentioned in the previous speakers, it's hard to stay on that schedule. So we got it out a year late, no problem. But the reason we set that 5-year cadence was so that we would have the opportunity to set some very near-term goals, some midterm goals, and long-term goals, and be able to revisit them on regular intervals to reevaluate those targets. The update process from start to finish took over a year. We contracted pretty early on with Brailsford and Dunleavy. And one of the first things we did was we took a really thorough survey of the sustainability staff to fill out, looking at all areas of sustainability and what campuses can do. It was a little challenging. We kind of wanted to do everything. So, it was to narrow our focus, not just surveying the sustainability staff, but we also surveyed our Chancellor's Committee for Sustainability and Energy, which is a broad group of stakeholders and implementers. We also looked at, or Brailsford and Dunleavy helped us look at peer institutions and aspirational peer institutions. So who's doing about, where we're at sustainability wise and who's really kicking butt, and how could we do that too? They also came, B&D, Brailsford and Dunleavy also came and did a site visit to tour our campus, to talk with stakeholders and to talk with implementers. And then they trained us on how to do listening sessions. So we went out and did as many listening sessions as possible with groups that we already had relationships with, and anyone who would let us talk to them for a while. And what we did for that was we talked about what they saw as challenges, what are their priorities, what might have been, what was in our plan previously that they'd like to keep, what they think was not an area to focus on, and especially what they want to see in our next plan. So we also had online forums to gather more feedback from folks that we weren't able to connect with directly. And then we also had 2 town halls as this plan was drafted and revised, and that was a way to get to show everyone where we were at on the plan, and to get some real-time feedback. So another thing too to mention is all of our previous plans were produced in-house. I started in our office in late 2018, so I wasn't there for the more recent update. But it was written by mostly the sustainability staff. They'd also hired a graduate student to help. I think there's some advantages in hiring out because it brought in a broader perspective. They were able to focus full time on this, whereas when we were doing this in-house previously, it was trying to find time on top of the job that we're already doing, which is, as you all know, very busy. So having that outside expert dedicated to this, and also being able to draw comparisons and success stories from other universities was nice to have. All right. I don't want to go to the next slide yet, sorry. Some key differences too between our 2018 and 2024 plan was in the language trying to be more active. So whereas in the 2018 plan, we would say things that we should do, a lot of us advocated for making stronger commitments. And instead of saying, we should recycle more, it was a commitment that we will recycle more, making that target more concrete. It doesn't always translate to more concrete action, but having this plan get signed off by multiple stakeholders and implementers, including our chancellor, spreads more accountability. All right, we can go to the next slide now. So the final plan is the result of many months of thoughtful consideration and collaboration between our unit, which is Planning, Sustainability, and Project Management, our national partner, Brailsford and Dunleavy, and members of our community who provided input throughout. In the chat there, I dropped links to our 2018 plan and our 2024 plan. If you want to skim through it, you can. Some other major differences in our 2018 plan, we had 7 strategies, and we wanted to reevaluate that and coalesce around our 5 climate commitments so that everything lines up better. Since I'm the Zero Waste Program Director, my focus was definitely on waste. Some changes that we made between that previous plan and the current plan is at UIC, we have dual stream recycling. In 2018, we were thinking of moving to single stream recycling in the interest of efficiency. However, studies show that you can get more effective recycling and cleaner recycling streams if you maintain dual stream. So we decided to stay with that. Also in 2018, we had a bottled water policy goal. And that was one that we actually did pass. So in 2021, we passed a UIC policy that was signed by our chancellor that prohibits using bottled water for events and on campus. This was a big success, except that nobody really heard about it. Because it came out in 2021, people were only partially on campus. There weren't a lot of events going on, and there wasn't a lot of attention to it. So that's something that we have the policy now, but spreading awareness is really, really critical in getting people to adhere to it. Another big change to our updated plan is in zero waste anyway, there's a lot more goals. So in 2018, we only had 4 main goals that with like subsections. In our 2024 plan, we had 16. Also, we shifted our focus further upstream because that's where you can make more impact for zero waste, rather than really focusing on recycling and how to sort better and stuff like that. So we've kind of reevaluated our priorities, and I hope in our next iteration, when we revisit this again in 2029, one of the things that's emerging that I'm sure you've all seen emerging is microplastics and nanoplastics. And this is not something that we've really addressed in this plan, but it's an emerging public health concern and environmental concern. So I think that that's something that we'll be definitely discussing more and looking more closely at. The rest of my slides are just photos. So I'm just going to quickly go through those. For at least zero waste, we have always done waste audits. We're always going to do waste audits, so we're understanding where we can take action and mitigate the amount of materials coming onto campus. So that's an image of us doing a waste audit. A little over a year ago, we actually restarted our bottles and cans recycling program. It had gone on a hiatus during the pandemic. So in the next picture, you can see this is one of our amazing building service workers that is emptying a plastic bag of bottles and cans into a bin because those plastic bags get tangled in recycling equipment at the sorting facility. In the next image here, we have also focused a lot more on composting. So this is one of my amazing student employees, Jermisha, helping staff a zero waste event and encouraging people to compost. We call it compost coaching. And then finally here, the last slide is another amazing student employee, Lydia Vulich, who was featured on CBS earlier this summer because she has been helping grow the capacity of our Food Recovery Network student chapter. And we actually hired her because she's been doing such an amazing job. And by paying her to do her good work, it expanded her capacity to continue to do more of it and grow the volunteer base and recover more food from our campus. So that is my presentation. Thank you guys for listening, and happy to answer some questions in the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Liz. And also, sorry for having to push you along a little bit. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and we'll jump into Q&A if Elissa and Sara could come back on video. I'm gonna start with some of the questions we have in registration. We have some questions in the Q&A, and I'm just full disclosure. I think that there was a question about AI. I don't think we're there yet. I don't know if I'm speaking for you, Sarah, Elissa, and Liz, but I think that could be a good topic for us to maybe focus on in the future. But for this specific webinar, we're really trying to focus on how folks have updated their climate action plan, which, as each of them said, took a plenty amount of time, over a year, which these things that are more current and recent obviously were not happening a year ago, or they were just in the beginning. So if you have questions, try and have them really focused on maybe the process of updating a climate action plan. We obviously have a lot of other pressing issues happening outside of updating a CAP, but just for our panelists and for the topic at hand. So I'm going to jumpstart with the first question, which is how or what types of engagement activities do you find the most engaging and effective to help gather stakeholder feedback? So we'll start with you, Sarah and Elissa, and then we'll have Liz also chime in. So we'll just jump that way, and then we'll jump into another question.
Yeah, so I would highlight a few things. One being that when we went into classrooms, like I mentioned earlier, having something that was built into class time was really helpful in terms of driving the number of survey responses that we got. And the other thing I would highlight, and Elissa kind of touched on it, when we had our in-person event, our Climate Change is Scary event on Halloween, we had an opportunity for folks we just had big pieces of butcher paper and markers and time for folks to just draw or write. And I thought, I wouldn't want to draw something that everybody else is going to see, as I'm passing on the way to lunch or whatever. But we had so much engagement with that drawing exercise of your carbon-free future. Elissa, what would you add?
Yeah, I think meeting people where they're at. So as I mentioned, like having an event in the cafeteria, they're already in there getting lunch. We often have events in the courtyard. So on nice days when people are already walking through the courtyard, having something that's eye-catching that they'll stop by and chat to us. We also do a lot of kind of incentives. So handing out candy if they fill out a survey, or if they did all 4 stations at our Climate Change is Scary event, they got a cookie, or if they fill out a survey, they were entered in for a prize drawing. So having some sort of incentives too for filling out surveys or giving us feedbacks is nice as well.
Yeah, we did some of those strategies as well. And I totally agree, like go to where they are, because if you try to bring them to you, it's, at least for us where we have 2 campuses, people won't trek across campus to come. And if you're waiting for them to come to you, then you're only getting the folks that are already engaged with the Office of Sustainability. And so to get those other perspectives, you really have to go to the classrooms, you have to go to the department meetings, you have to go to their quarterly trainings, to get to talk to the audiences that might not be thinking about sustainability, but are affected by it and might be responsible for implementing it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, our next one is how do you engage other areas with the plans so they consider the goals their own? I don't know who wants to jumpstart this one.
I can start. So we tried to bring other departments in as early as we possibly could. And part of that, I guess, is just partnership on our existing work. And so then if we had, a meeting set up to discuss something we're already working on, how do we weave this climate action plan update conversation into it, and then using the climate action plan as a way to communicate this work that we're doing. I think that really helped with buy-in, but it is also something that we had to keep working at. We have stakeholders that we all have full inboxes, we all have lots of things keeping us busy. And so it was something that required, reminder throughout the process.
Any other feedback on that one?
It is hard to get everyone to feel ownership. Sometimes, other units, other faculty, professor, staff, they look at Office of Sustainability and they think that is your job. So to get others to have ownership, part of that engagement process of putting the plan together is really important to make sure that you have a way for them to provide their feedback and then for them to provide feedback again, to look at what was put in there and revisit and say, look, here's what we've updated based on what you said. And also making sure that they understand that sometimes their ideas are going to be combined with other similar ideas and reworded, but providing ample opportunities to see it, review it, re-review it over and over again.
Yeah, I like the idea of showing them where their feedback was incorporated, right? So having them see realistically, okay, this is what you gave us, this is what came out of that. I think that could be really helpful to maybe help people feel that ownership a little bit more, that it made it in and this is how. Okay. So the next question we have is, how can we build support for climate action in a time or at any time when budgets are tight?
It's a great question. So I would give a few examples of some events that have kind of come about organically we've had on campus that have been pretty low cost, but have gotten conversations started about very real hands-on ways that we can reduce waste, build circular economies, and give an opportunity for people to meet in person. So we've been doing a clothing swap where folks donate at donation points across campus. We have been laundering the items, which is a bit of work, but then we have a time where students, staff, faculty can come and browse items and pick them out for free. It's been really well received. We've also done a refillables event similarly, where we've purchased some good environmentally friendly cleaning and household products, and then folks can come and either bring a container or we have some available that they can fill up. So those have been low cost and a way to have conversations about these things and build community too. And Elissa, I don't know if you'd add anything there.
Yeah, those are some great events that have been really popular with our student population.
Finding ways to do low budget or free activities is also really great. We started a plastic film collection because we found if we collect enough of it, we can take it to the local grocery store that we partnered with, and then they send it to Trex, which makes it into a wood alternative decking. I know that's not ideal for material reuse and everything, but it's better than it getting landfilled, which was the alternative. We're doing something similar for styrofoam. And these projects are, optional, and they've only cost our time, and we're having students support it. So that's really helpful. But, trying to get those small and easy wins, and finding free programs like what you mentioned, free projects and programs that we can do. With the water bottle refill stations, I wanted to mention that too. We have a couple hundred of those on campus. Some of them we've had for over 10 years, and looking at the refill counters, several of them have already paid for themselves. So we're able to point that out now to departments that are still buying bottled water.
Yeah, those definitely aren't easy. Go ahead, Elissa.
Yeah, all with Earth Month coming up really quickly. Some programming we do for that, like we connect with local organizations, and they've been really great partners, doing some free programming for Earth Month. So I'd recommend reaching out to local organizations. Like we have the Seattle Electric Vehicle Association come on our campus, and they do an electric vehicle car show, which is really nice. A group of people bring their cool electric vehicles on campus, and that's a free event, and folks really love that. They open up, and show folks the batteries and talk about their cars, and that's been a really fun event on campus. We do a tabling event, so local organizations come and talk to students about their organizations, and that's been a really fun. And sustainable vendors come, so we call that our Earth Market, and that's a free event to host, and students get to walk through the courtyard and shop local, and meet a bunch of different organizations that they could volunteer with and get involved with. And so that's been a really wonderful free event to host on campus as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so in the Q&A, Briar is asking, she's curious if you've thought about your next round of updates yet. We need to start this process early next year, but our current cap is so comprehensive, and while we've made progress, most of our goals and strategies will likely remain the same with some modifications. I'm thinking about a compressed update document and curious if you have experience with this or think it might be relevant for your next update. I know you just finished, so it's like.
Yes. Yeah, and we are, full transparency, working on our fleet decarbonization plan right now. So we have not thought through timing for our next update a whole lot. I would advocate for it to be a shorter amount of time than, what was it, I guess, decade that we had between updates last go round. So hopefully shorter than that. But yeah, I mean, Briar, I think the idea of a compressed timeline is great, especially if you have a sense of sections and what you're moving towards with the final version of it.
We do annual updates, or not updates, check-ins on where we're at with our goals, to see if we're meeting them, if we're on target. But I mentioned a little earlier, for our next round, I would like to see attention on micro and nanoplastics. And I've seen the chatter in the chat about AI, and I'm sure a lot of us are going to be thinking about how to offset the additional energy needs from AI, or how to address those energy needs. And even more will change in the next, 5 years that we'll need to be looking at.
Yeah, and something that I've learned also throughout the hosting this series is that the marketability and the aesthetic, kind of like Sara, Elissa, you mentioned, of the plan itself is really helpful to have, so it's digestible for people. And so having it, the timeline not only being compressed, but also the document, right? So having something, we had a campus that just has like a one-sheeter of like, this is our climate action plan, so it's really easy for folks to digest, and it's not just a 99-page document that has all of these different emission reduction goals, and people, don't connect with the scope 1, 2, and 3. They just want to know the bare minimum or the bare basics. So that's also something that I feel like has been talked about quite a bit over the course of this series. So we'll end with just one more question. And so someone had asked about re-engaging stakeholders. What has that looked like for you guys with the update that you've had, or with the time you've been within the institution? And then we'll close it out for the day.
We try and stay engaged with a lot of our stakeholders as much as possible through our Chancellor's Committee of Sustainability and Energy. And so we have kind of these, subcommittees that meet regularly. But having this engagement piece does bring them in as partners. It makes them accountable for it too. And so that those touch points aren't just getting their opinions, but it's also an opportunity to show them and reinforce how much this matters and how much this is a commitment and priority of the university.
Yeah, I mentioned our fleet decarbonization plan that we're writing, and so that's been an opportunity to re-engage with folks. And then another way is we have started having a quarterly sustainability update, and we structure it around the CAP sections. And so that's given us a way to go back and say, here's updates in each of these areas. And that's been a really nice structure that it's provided us as well.
I'll say one more thing that we do plan to do is, now that we have our freshly minted climate commitment action plan, we hope to tackle these goals in task force. So we'll meet regularly with our subcommittees, but take each of these goals on its own and then have working groups, task force around implementing them and achieving them.
I love that. I think that's a great idea. All right. Well, as it usually does, the time goes by very quickly. So I just wanted to say thank you to Sara, Elissa, and Liz. We really appreciate your time and effort that you put in prepping for the webinar. And yeah, I think any last words from the panelists or I guess advice around updating the CAP? What's your number one thing you would tell folks?
Start early, I guess.
Give yourself lots of time.
Yes.
And grace. Lots of time and grace.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much again. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we hope to see you soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.